Hello and welcome to my tutorial on Backstage. Backstage is an open platform for building developer portals. At the same time, it's a tool developed by Spotify and luckily open sourced. Today we will learn how to run and execute Backstage locally and make use of one of its core features called software templates. In other words, we will create a .NET 6 Web API template and we will make use of it by generating a service based on the template. So let's get started. First, we take a look on the documentation and the Getting Started page. As we can see here, it's important that Node.js, Yarn and Docker is installed. If that's the case, we can easily get started by executing the following command: npx backstage create app. We have to choose a name. We will go with Backstage Tutorial. And then we have to choose the type of database. We will go with SQLite here. I will skip the process here as it takes a while, and therefore I will continue with the prepared one. Once the installation on your side is finished, you actually have to navigate into the folder, which has the same name as the app, or how we call the app. So I will do the same and go into my Backstage tutorial folder. And there we can easily start Backstage by running yarn dev. That takes a moment. As you can see, we already have Backstage available with components here. Same is the case for APIs. And we would also be able to already create a new component based on some pre-existing templates, like Spring Boot gRPC service, for example. But now let's take a look how we create our own template and import it into Backstage. To do so, I'm using azure-devops today, and to be able to use azure-devops, or actually later store the service which we create based on the template, also in azure-devops, it's important to create a personal access token with the rights to create, write and read a repository. In other words, full code rights. This access token we need to enter this access token into the app config YAML, which is the configuration of our locally running Backstage, and you can find it in the related folder. What I added is this 3 lines, the integration Azure with the host dev.azure.com, and the token, I copied my personal access token here. This is just a placeholder. In addition to that, I also edited the scaffolding. Under the scaffolder section, I added Azure with the visibility public. So now let's have a look on how a template looks like in Backstage. A template is a YAML file. It starts with the API version, which is v1 beta 2 here. It is important to define the kind, which is template here, because the YAML file is used for a component which is a higher level entity in Backstage. And to create a template, we need to define the kind template. I've added a little bit of metadata information here. So the name .NET 6 Web API template, the title, which is later shown in the UI, as well as a description and some text, which could be used to search for a particular template. Now the interesting part comes, the specification, starting with the owner as well as the type. The type is service, so when we create something out of or based on the template, it will be a service. Afterwards, we can see the parameters. The parameters here are actually executed in a wizard way, so it consists of two steps. The first is provide component information, and the second one is to choose a location. Let's start with the first one. Required is a component ID and an owner. A component ID is actually a string defining the name of my service. So in other words, the name of the solution or the CS project file, as well as of a namespace, for example. I give you the relation directly. So the README file here contains values component ID as well as values description. This will later get replaced by what we choose in the UI. As you can see, the same is the case for the project file as well as for the solution file, and again it will get replaced. Going back to the template. We saw the description before in the README file. It's optionally, so in other words not required. The owner again is required. It will be picked out of the owner field, and allowed are only groups existing in Backstage already. In the next step of the wizard, we have to choose the location. Actually, we have to choose a repository URL, and allowed is only azure-devops. We will end up with a string, but we will create this string based on the repo URL picker. Let's take a look at the steps. The first step is fetching the template. The template itself is stored under skeleton. So we can see here under the folder skeleton, I have my, again, solution, CS project files, the actual program itself, just a very simple .NET 6 web API. And going back to the template, that's actually what provides the template information. And yeah, we will replace, as seen before, several parts of that template. The next step is publish. So the actual service with the replaced information will get published to a repository. Actually, to the repository we have to choose in the second step here. Last but not least, the step register is executed, and it will register the service which we create on the Backstage site. Therefore, the catalog info YAML is important, which is this one. Again, the name as well as the owner and the description gets replaced by the information we choose. So let's take a look how this works from a UI or from a Backstage UI perspective. What we need for that is actually the location to my template YAML. So I will copy this. And then we need to register an existing component. As we learned, a template is also a component, just the kind is template. So I enter the URL I copied before, and then I import it. I would now have the chance to register something else, but I can also take a look. I can't see the component here because it's of type template and therefore not listed. But if I want to create a new component, I can already see my .NET 6 Web API service here. It contains the tags I talked about, and assuming we have a lot of templates available here, I can, for example, search for .NET to only see the available ones. So let's try if our template works. What I need to do for that is I actually need to provide a name for the service I now want to create based on the template. So I will go with let's test service. Choose the owner out of the groups. I will go with Acme Corporation here. In the next step, I have to choose the location where my newly created service created based on the template will be stored. So I need to enter the organization and the owner. and the name of the repository which will be created. In the next steps, I see a review before I can actually create it. As you can see, this is the organization, that's the owner, and a new repository needs to be created, and that's also why we need to add the personal access key into the configuration before. So now let's create it. That was it. Within a few seconds, we fetched the skeleton template, we published the new service into its new location, and we registered the component also in Backstage. So if we now take a look again on the components here and look at all of the components, we can see already the Let's Test service is available. Where is it available? We can see it's available under my organization, my project, and based on the name I choose under Let's Test Service. So now let's see if it actually works, if we can execute the newly generated service. To do that, I copy the link to be able to clone the repository. That was possible. I navigate into the new folder. And from here, I try if .NET is actually able to run the project. Building, and it successfully runs it. And let's see if I can open it. Here we go. Under localhost 5001, the actual service is currently running and returns a hello world. So everything works. That was actually it, and it showed the great potential of Backstage. Thanks a lot for watching.